Clark. I'm Caroline Clark, and we're joined today by the president and CEO of the American College for Financial Services, just outside of Philadelphia. George Nichols has been in this position since 2018. He's a seasoned financial pro himself, and he was sort of just in the midst of really galvanizing this educational institution to move forward into a new space when COVID hit. So we all know what that's like. George, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and it's wonderful to be with you.
So glad that you can join us. I think that the story of the American College of Financial Services is really one that most African Americans in particular are not aware of. Can you sort of just orient us first about what this educational institution is, what it does, and how you came to lead it?
I sure will, and thank you for the question. The college started in 1927. It was from a former Wharton professor of insurance, wanted to professionalize the insurance industry. And so he really wanted to create an educational program that would prepare insurance agents to serve their clients better. It was really a correspondence college. They used to actually send stuff to you in the mail. They'd send you the book and the test. You do your work, you'd send it back to them, and then they'd grade you. And then based on that, they would give you your designation. Fast forward to where we are now. About 20 years ago, the college actually made a bold decision to go online. And instead of sending it through the mail, we would actually let you go online and you could take your courses. So we were one of the first online colleges, and we are nonprofit. And so it has had ups and downs and financial challenges. They've actually typically had a former PhD that would run it, an academic. And it's a hybrid where we actually do business with financial services firms, banks, insurance companies, asset managers, and others. And we educate their advisors. We give them professional designations, we give them knowledge for them to take care of your retirement needs, your financial planning needs, and things like that. And then when they were having these troubles, they said, we think we want a business executive. I remember in the interview, I said, I don't have a PhD and I'm not an academic. And they're like, good, you're the guy for us.
Right.
But it was really coming in and saying, all right, you have this 93-year-old institution. How do we prepare it for the future? And my view was education's changing. People, I can go to Google and I can get information. So a lot of people aren't spending a long time going and studying for classes. You look at the debt load that a lot of our students have. And so I wanted to look at the view of how could we take our information and put it in small bites so that you could take in what you really need, go do your work, come back, hopefully you've had a good experience and you get more of that. That was really sort of the strategy. We have 170,000 alumni. 1 in every 5 financial advisor who has a professional designation got it from the American College. So we really feel very, very proud about that. It really has not been known, unfortunately, in the Black community, because I think financial services overall has been one of those that most advisors take care of people who already have money, and we try to help you grow. Where that a lot of companies may hire agents or advisors and then just focus on a particular clientele. Our goal now is really to change that because the world's changing. In the future, we're going to be a majority society, and we want to be on the front end of that.
Yeah, I think that it's important to say that diversity was already on the agenda at the college before they brought you in. They had become, you mentioned that the college had gone to online learning, which certainly had to position you well for this moment in history. But the college had also really been looking at the lack of diversity in financial services. I think currently it's fewer than 5% of all financial professionals are African American, which is really stunning in 2020, although there's been some progress in terms of gender. So, so much has happened in this moment that's been focused on what, not surprising to us, the plight of African Americans, our issues with intergenerational wealth creation, with just stabilizing our finances in the midst of being more acutely impacted by health challenges and all sorts of structural barriers to our success. But you came out of the financial services environment. I know you were like 17 years at New York Life and the first African American on New York Life's leadership committee. Um, so you have a lot of history in this area. What made you go into financial services that keeps so many of us from doing that? And what are the barriers to entry that are most concerning to you now as we approach very quickly 2021?
Well, I wish I could say that I always planned to go into financial services, but that wouldn't be truthful. It was one of those things that you sort of like fall into it in terms of the jobs that you had. I had worked for a Blue Cross plan, and then I was asked to be the insurance commissioner in the state of Kentucky. So I became a regulator and over all of the insurance in the state. And, it's interesting because when you're at a state level, when you make decisions, the people you're impacting. I remember people would come up to me at Walmart and say, "Hey, George, I need to talk to you because my policy's gone up for something." So you really, really get to know that. But you also think about growing up poor in the segregated South. And I remember as a kid, I used to tell myself, they're not treating me that way because I'm Black. They're treating me that way because I'm poor. Because then I believe that if I made money, maybe they treat me better. And of course, as I got older, that didn't change.
And this is Louisville, right? Important. This is
I was
Louisville.
actually born in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is the
okay.
southern part of the state. And I'm not necessarily proud, but the fact was during the Civil War, the state split. My part of the state went with the South. And so that was the environment of which, Bowling Green at the time I was there was as Dixie South as any other part that you want to go to in Mississippi, Alabama, or Tennessee. And so we grew up in that environment. We didn't have a lot. I had a family unit, I had sisters and no brothers, and both my mother and father were there. But all our richness was love, and our richness was our support. And I started seeing the impact of money on our family. And I remember my father lost his job, and my mother had to get a job as a domestic, which actually flipped the family dynamic. Not just for my family, a lot of Black men lost their jobs and they couldn't provide for their families, and the wives would go work. And so we would take my mother to her job, and it was the first time I noticed that people lived in different houses. Those houses are really nice. Now we couldn't go in them, but they were nice. And so that was really amazing to me. And then I was an athlete, and I remember I was one of my oldest, dearest friends that has been my friend since I was 13 years old. He actually lived 3 houses down from where my mother worked. And then, I was at his house one day and they wanted me to come in for dinner. Well, I knew I couldn't go in the house down where my mother worked, so I wasn't going to go in this house. And we were arguing, but his mother and father said, "Well, you got to eat with us." Well, not only the shock of and worry of thinking, "Oh my God, they're going to tell the neighbor that I was at dinner and then my mother's going to get fired." But then I saw a different dynamic. The father came home in a suit after work, and talked about what the family did. And I'm like, wait a minute. I started seeing that there was this financial issue that allowed them to live differently. And it was not something that I was aware of. And so even at an early age, I began to think what, if we can do a better job at managing our money, making money, and doing things and understanding the impact that it has on alleviating some of the issues, we get a better life. And so all of that has always carried me in these jobs that I've had, that, the financial implications on Blacks more than anything has really perpetrated some of the problems that we are still facing as a community. And so when I got to New York Life, one of the things I'm very proud of is we started a focus on the African-American market. And, at one point when I left, of the 10,000 agents, 1,200 of those agents were Black, and really focused. We had a big initiative called the 50 billion, of trying to get 50 billion of face amount policy in the Black community. Because the other thing I learned was many whites were transferring wealth with life insurance policies.
Right.
And well, first of all, if you look at our history, unfortunately, we had race-based premiums. So our policies cost a lot for less than what we were getting.
Right.
But it was still a tool to do generational wealth transfer. And I don't think, had I not gone through the experience, I don't think I'd picked any of that up. I could have been like others and not be knowledgeable about it. But when I start seeing all those things, I'm now a senior executive at New York Life, and they're asking me to do a variety of things. And I said, I think I want to do something else. And then this job offer came by. And they said, we're looking for a president of the American College. And I said, I have no interest. I don't want to do that. And a friend says, just look at the job description. So I'm not going to do that. I want to be a college president maybe someday, but this ain't it. I don't want to do this. My wife read it, and she came out and she said, you need to read this. This is your job. This is everything you've ever thought about. I read it. I'm like, yes. But the mission statement says to benefit society. And then you start thinking of 170,000 people that have our designation that are out there helping individuals, families, and businesses. And that I could be in a role where that if we did more, we could impact more people and we could benefit society. At first I was thinking like, yeah, that's pretty hokey. But in reality, that's real. If someone gets smarter like I got smarter, and they're doing better and can provide more for their family, then we benefited society. And that is really the recognition that everything that I'd gone through somehow or another came down to I could be in a leadership role to do this job. And I could leverage the fact that this 93-year history of helping people who had money, that I could help my community, I could help other underrepresented communities by leveraging what we did for the majority. Yeah, I thought this is a pretty good opportunity for me to really, and so it's, as I shared with you, this is a call, this is not a job. I'm supposed to be here. I'm excited about what I do. And every day, I may not know your name, but I know that if we do a great job creating knowledge for the person that you're getting help from, then we've done our part. And I feel a part of it.
I know you see this as a calling, but you sort of describe this moment where there's a business imperative and there's a moral imperative, right?
Yes.
And they sort of align. And I guess sort of in another, if you think of it as a triangle, the other corner is that, there is a cultural, racial imperative here. There's an imperative to just do the right thing, to deal with equity and justice in finance in a way that we have just never been able to accomplish in society, in this country. But this is not a new dilemma, as you well know, and this is not a new issue, and this is not the first time that people in leadership positions like you have decided, this is the moment we're really going to make a difference here. So what is different now as you think about what you have confronted in 2020 as the leader of this institution and coming out of, we pray, this pandemic leading into 2021, what has shifted this year that you really feel this is a moment that is going to be unlike any other in the positive?
Yeah, so two things. So we've been doing a conference for African-American financial professionals. We've been doing it for about 15 years. So this started well before they had the first Black president of the college. But it was a recognition that even back then, there was this need for more diversity in the financial services space. And because of the growth of the spending power of Blacks, they were saying like, we should start first in that community. So we've been doing this. And my first conference was last year in 2019. We had about 700 advisors there. And it was actually the largest we'd ever had. But I said, you know what, we should shoot for 1,000. And, and people were saying, that's a stretch. I'm like, oh, we should shoot for 1,000. So our goal was, we're going to have 1,000 advisors at our conference. Okay, then you go into the COVID-19 and no one can travel. So we had 1,300 that signed up for the conference, but they didn't have to travel. They had to worry about expenses, and it was really just a one-day conference. But I was excited
they did have to pay for it, which
they
is
did have to pay for it,
right? Because in the virtual space, a lot of things have done well, but also they haven't cost anything. You did actually charge for that
Yes,
conference. So people really wanted to
they
get on.
really did. So we were really excited to get 1,300, and it was a day-long conference of which we had this very, very impressive, powerful individual speaking named Caroline Clark. I don't know if you know her, but she was awesome.
Yeah.
And so
I heard nothing but great things.
I'm telling you, she was like number one on our list of the feedback. Everybody's like, you got to have her back next year. So I hear that she may be coming back next year. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, it was a great conference. It really was.
It was. And so it was, they felt good. And after 1,300 people signed up, we averaged between 850 and 900 people during the course of the whole day. And so that was exciting. We raised enough money where we were able to expand the number of African-American scholarships that we provide. And some of those are specifically focused on HBCUs. So we're excited that not only did we give good education and knowledge, what we got from that was to be able to do more for the next generation. So we're excited. So that's one of those things where we had this hugely successful, probably the largest conference of African-American advisors in the country as a result of COVID-19. Well, something else has happened as well. When George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, and May 25th was my birthday. And I remember all of the emotion and the feeling of that. So I put out a public statement denouncing all these things, not just George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all the others that are there. And I started thinking, like, you know what? I don't really care about statements. What can the college do? What can I do in the platform that I have? What can the platform of the college do that even goes beyond us trying to do a better job of helping more and more Black advisors come in? So we created two things. One, we established a Center for Economic Empowerment and Equality. And the first focus of that is what we call 4 steps forward. How do we help the Black community? Now, we said we don't know a lot about criminal justice, so I'm not going to go in that space. And the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black Americans, I don't know a lot about the healthcare piece in terms of what the college does. But the college has these relationships with all these financial services institutions around the country. And we said, let us focus on the financial and economic implications of the Black community. Now, where this became different is I spent enough time in corporate America that I said, we're not going to approach this as a social justice initiative. We're going to approach this as an economic justice initiative. And we're going to say to everybody, I want you to think about how you make money by helping Blacks make money. So you get to make money by doing good, but it really has to be focused on that the Black community is growing, that we're creating upward mobility and wealth creation in that community. And here's all the benefits you get. One, we're going to make sure that whatever investment you do in this program, that you're going to get a return. So you can't, the whole focus there was, I don't want them to define it as charity, because when it's charity, the next charity is where money's going to go. If you're making money, you're going to stay with it. And because wealth creation's decades, it takes decades to do it. So that was the first thing we said we want to do different. The other thing we said is, typically when we go through crisis in this country, we like to write checks. And we write these checks and I don't know what happens to them. And we do some stuff and, and then all of a sudden the next crisis comes and we're like in the same place and we're writing more checks. So we said, okay, yes, I want your financial contribution, but I want something else. I want your intellectual capital. The same people that have helped you make money, we want them to help us make money for the Black community. Make us a market. Think about it that way. Yep, I'll take your diversity inclusion folks. I'll take your philanthropic folks, but I also want your business people thinking about looking at us differently than just how do I get the money out? Because I'm saying that if you grow our spending power, that means that's growth for you. And those are your future clients. Those are your future employees. Those are your future leaders. So you even get a long-term benefit from it. But now we're having a conversation with them in the businesses. I have Dr. Pamela Jolly, who is our senior strategist. She says our goal is to speak the King James language because that's what they know. And it's amazing that companies have said to me like, well, no one's ever talked to us this way. Well, I think we really want to talk to you about this. I said, well, good. But that's really what we've done. And so in the 4 steps, the first one's focused on Black females. We said, okay, we can't boil the ocean. So what segment of the Black community would we want to focus on that we think would have the greatest impact? Black women. They're the gatekeepers of the community. When you look at the statistics, that 89% of single parent homes in the Black community led by women. 63% of the primary breadwinner in the family in Black communities, a woman. 68% of all Black college graduates, women. Who's having the children? Who's raising Black males? This one's not difficult. So we're saying that if we could improve their financial knowledge, wherever they are in their life cycle, they'd have an impact today and for generations to come. Then we said that you companies are making decisions. You got this research coming in, and you got a bunch of white men sitting around a room saying, this is what it says about Black folk. Well, I think we need some more Black folk sitting around the table with you. So how do we get Blacks out of these middle management jobs into more senior level roles? And the goal is, how do we teach them how to navigate white corporate America? I'm not talking about basic development programs. I'm talking about how they overcome the barriers that exist being Black. It wasn't lost on me that it took 167 years for New York Life to have a Black person on its executive management committee. 167 years. That's challenging. So how do we help people navigate that? But also there's recognition that the only way we're going to do that, even if we teach Black executives, is if we get white executives to join them. So if we put white executives through the same program so they can begin to see with their own eyes these unintentional barriers that are keeping people behind, then maybe we can actually change it. Third, is this a part of our conference? Well, if Black women are successful, we get more Black executives successful, they want an advisor that looks like them. So how do we help companies recruit more Blacks into the space? And then how do we keep them retained? The last piece is what we call collective impact. Now, think of COVID-19. Every pharmaceutical company in America, in the world, is trying to find the vaccine. We've got 2 that seem to be coming along, but they were actually sharing information. That's not something they've ever done. So yeah, we're still competing, but we're sharing information. Well, what if we got all of the companies, the banks that are writing these big checks, what if we put all their money together and said, let's figure out what are the programs that would have the most impact, and then let's funnel the money there that's going to lift Blacks out of that. Not, I get to do my part, you do your part. And we are now bringing banks and insurance companies and asset managers by sector together to say, okay, if we pooled our resources, intellectual and financial, and just focused on how to lift up certain pieces of the Black community that helps build wealth, you would have a greater impact, because once it works, then we can replicate it in other communities, customized to those communities. So that's what our 4 steps is. And I'm blown away at the response, because people are like, wow, this is really, and to me, it was simple when I realized, going back to being a kid, how the majority thinks of money.
Yeah. You talk about replicating this program, but how will you know if it's successful? What are your measurements for success? What are your goals?
I think that, so first of all, we want to be data-driven, evidence-based. It has to be. But I think collectively, we have to determine what that is by research that is done, but then also tested against the Black community. I can offer financial literacy to Black women right now today. I mean, there's so much financial literacy out there. That would be great, okay? Well, it's been out there for 25, 30 years and it's never worked.
Right.
Well, think about this. What if we went to employers and said, what we'd like to do is identify your most respected employees who are Black females and teach them about financial literacy and let them teach all the other Black women. Now I've created something that has to start, which is called trust. Not someone who's trying to sell you a product. I'm not trying to sell a product. I'm trying to educate. Well, we have done research that shows that if I've established trust and I've got someone that I respect, like an ambassador, that is giving me that information, I'm going to listen. My wife will tell me, you know what, we talked about financials when I went to get my hair done. Okay. Now, I don't think I want Tiffany giving me financial advice, but that's where my wife got it from when she went to get her hair done. But if we were finding sources for Tiffany to refer people to, and that knowledge was coming back, you know, when they at the shop with the girls, then we've actually made it back. We have to rethink this. And then when we've done that, then we say, okay, can we identify where you were at and where you are 12 months from now? And wherever you are, I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but I can figure out what worked and what didn't work. Yeah. And then what works, we're going to apply it. That's really the way we want to do it.
What about targeting a younger audience? You know, you talk about sort of coming into an awareness about the differences in what finances can do and our orientation maybe toward finance, even broken down by race when you were a kid, right? And it seems to me by the time you're at the college level, you sort of have a path. And yeah, it can change, but you know, very often you're already on an educational path. And in terms of your finances, you know, it has to be more deeply embedded in us, I think, for ultimate financial success and really shifting this paradigm that you're not getting your first introduction to what to do with money when you first start to make some money.
Correct.
Right? And for most Black kids, I mean, ideally, we have jobs in high school, you know, in some cases younger, if we're fortunate enough to get that kind of opportunity. But nobody's really talking to us about what to do with money, using money as a tool, building wealth over the long haul versus, you know, what are you going to spend? What are you going to spend your money on today, right? Which sneakers do you want? Which whatever. So, I mean, have you thought at all about that? Because I think targeting Black women, of course, you know, is an interesting way to go and can obviously bear fruit. But, you know, who is really reaching our younger people before they're even there so that they can feed that ambition? Want to go to college, to want to become a financial professional, you know, is this program or any other things that you're looking at, perhaps the Center for Equity, looking at that sort of an approach?
We've talked about that, but we actually said we'd be willing to start with college freshmen. But the thing is, first of all, there are programs, not widespread, but there are programs for high school and even for middle school. The thing that our research has shown us is, yes, you do retain some level of the knowledge, but if it's not relevant, you lose it. So I use an example of New Jersey, and I won't say what part of New Jersey. My daughter lived in New Jersey. She moved to this particular area of New Jersey, and she said, "Dad, I got to save money because I want to travel." I'm like, okay, great. Now, crime, other issues. She went out one day and she called me. She said, "Do you know that there are no ATM machines?" This was 2 years ago. And can you imagine a community that doesn't have an ATM? But I said to her, like, yeah, I can see that because there are a lot of communities, Black communities, that don't have banking relationships. So there's no reason for an ATM machine to be there. And she said, "Well, Dad, I just don't understand that." Well, I also found out that New Jersey had a financial literacy program for junior high students in this area. So now let me talk to you about the relevance. Today, students, our lesson is about a checking account. Now, who is junior going to go talk to about a checking account? Because he can't go home and talk to mom and dad about it, right? Because it's not relevant to them.
Right.
And so we've looked at yes, there's programs, and we think others can do that and will do that. But what we said by starting with college freshmen and moving up is you're now on a path to create some level of income. Because when you've got some level of income, now I have something that's relevant to you and I can help you work through that. And yes, it would be better. I was working when I was 12. So yes, it would have been better that I had more knowledge about financials. But for us, given that we're a college, we said, like, let's just start there and then move up, because the financial literacy where we're trying to make an impact today is there are so many Black women that they are already, I may be making money, but I'm not sure what to do with it. And that's across the board. It's not just Black folk. People have always struggled with their relationship with money. And part of this is helping people in understanding their relationship with money. And so we're saying when there is some, now I've got something if you really want to do better, because now it becomes relevant. So we just felt like in order for us to try to have a greater impact that is more immediate, that if we started at that level where that either they're on a path to begin to make money or they are making money, that we now could have their attention and we could do more with it. And the other part of this is defining financial literacy from a broader perspective. It's not just like, how do I improve my credit? How do I put together a household budget? There are women who are doing that, but said, I hope to start a business. That's financial literacy. So how do we help them start a business? There are women who've already started. Matter of fact, if you look at the number of businesses are created by a percentage of numbers, Black women are creating vast more companies and businesses than anybody else. Well, how do I help you run it better? Then I can have a greater impact in terms of what the community is. And it really is, when I think about this moment, the question you ask, it really comes down to, there are things that we have to put in place that are for generations in the future, but we want to see some successes now so that people actually can believe we actually can do this. And while we have America's attention, we should be coming to them with solutions. And I'm not saying just like what we can do today, but what is the end game? What's the outcome that we want? Well, the outcome that we want is that Blacks are increasing in upward mobility and they're starting to build wealth. And we are not defining wealth by what America's defining for that, because people say wealth is you gotta be rich. No, I know people, he worked in a factory, she was a school teacher, they raised their kids, they sent them to college, they love their grandkids, they travel, they own their home, and when they die, they're gonna pass it all on. And you wanna know something? They think they're wealthy. And I want them to define that. But that's the path we wanna put them on as we go through this. And we want them to start seeing it right now so that then they can truly see the benefits long-term as we pass it on to the next generation.
How do this is such a unique moment in history. You talk about not wanting it to just be a moment. You're now working in Pennsylvania. There was so much focus, all eyes on Pennsylvania through the presidential election. And you've worked in government policy, right, associated with these issues.
Yes.
So how do we make sure this isn't just another fleeting moment? There are so many issues that we are facing as a people, as a nation, as a globe, right?
Yeah.
How do you sort of keep the pedal to the metal with this and not lose focus and not lose heart if other people's focus shifts?
The part of it is why we went into this and says this has to be a business imperative and you have to get a return, so that it becomes, if I want to create it into your DNA, I want to know first, I got to find out what drives your DNA. And for companies, it's returns and money. And so if we create solutions for them that's going to make them more money, then that's one way for me to get them to stay with this years and years and years into the future. We're not going to sell them on, in 2035 or 2040, going to be more Black folk than white folk. you know what? Most of them are saying like, well, I'll be retired by then anyway, so I ain't got to worry about it. So we have to figure out how do we get you committed now? And again, well, what drives you? It's the money that your company makes. Then how can we show you that this will get money for you in return? So that's the first thing. The second thing is and I think this is important. It's probably something that I learned in my little community. The answers have to start with us. So I don't believe that the effort we're putting together is going to save anybody. I don't believe the government's going to save anybody. And so part of this is how do we as Black Americans make sure that our community survives? It can't be that George has had financial success and George is not doing anything other than writing a check to United Negro College Fund or to my alma mater, my HBCU or whatever. It's got to be down in the community. And where we're sitting here saying like, okay, I want your financial and your intellectual capital. Do you know the financial and intellectual capital that we already have as Black Americans? And you know what? Yeah, okay, George, your job is to go and talk to companies on their level and see if they'll invest. But well, what are you doing? And so for me, my wife and I invested in a program for first generation students of color in college at our school that we met. And we built a network around them. We're talking to them about investment strategies. We're saying, this is what they taught us, and we're going to teach you. Now, we were fortunate there was some, white guy that said, I want to be your mentor, your sponsor. Great. Well, just in case they don't get one, I'm that white guy or that mentor they're looking for. And I think that in addition to this moment where companies are paying attention and people are writing checks and people saying, I want to do something and I want to do better, and they're asking what can they do, I also want to make sure that we Blacks who've been successful are thinking the same thing. And it's not what we can do at a global level. If every one of us were going back to the communities in which we were raised and saying, how do we make a difference there? How do we help that part? Okay, now we're getting support in a lot of different directions. But I've always believed that at the end of the day, it's our problem. It's our problem. You want to talk about Black on Black crime? It's our problem. And I know it's jobs and I get all I get all that. Then we just got to figure that out. And if we can create that, if we can come up with solutions, if we can leverage relationships that we have, then I think and be innovative in how we do it, I think we can make a difference. And so for me, it's like, okay, I got companies' attention. I'm going to talk to them in their language, and I'm going to see if I can get them to invest. I'm going to see if I can get them to give intellectual capital. But I have to redouble my efforts personally, that of my wife and my family, to our community, because we're going to do our part. Because even when the money originally, comes into the Black community, we ain't necessarily trusting it. Where you been at? Were you here before this happened? Did we feel like we were getting taken advantage of while you were here?
Right.
Then you know what? Then we got to be there to help assess whether this is like, I think they're setting us up for this. Right. Versus like, is this real? And I think that this is the time that we may be able to build on those things. That's I really have thought so much about this. And when we think about the circles that you're in, the circles that I'm in, and the people that we know, we think about our wealth. Think about, and we may not be Bill Gates, okay, but we know a lot of folks. Yeah. And those folks trust us and would do things for us when we show them that those things would help others.
Yeah.
So that's my belief is I got to do my part at the American College of Financial Services as a platform, but it actually, I'm gonna give even more as George Nichols III, a Black American, a Black man giving back to his community.
I think that there has been, we're coming out of a time where there's been such a leadership void in this country, and people just became so disheartened over the course of time. And we're in a moment, right, where we have some liftoff into a new year, a new administration, and all sorts of possibility. So I'm curious, as you look to that, being a Black leader, at a largely white institution that cultivates other leaders in what is now still a very largely white
Yes.
institution. How challenging is it to really lean in hard to this moment in a way that others could say is just sort of monolithic and self-serving, right? You're a Black man trying to really help the Black community and diversify. I know you now have, African Americans on your board. You've been very clear about wanting to have more women on the board and have a baseline of diversity on the board, all sorts of things that, even though the college has been thinking about these things, the sort of benchmarks weren't perhaps as specific.
Yep.
But how challenging is it? How much do you pause maybe or not, or just decide I'm done pausing, right? Being a Black leader in this moment when the issues we face are so compelling and deeply entrenched.
It is. I'm not pausing. You know, I remember when it actually started happening, and we came up with the 4 steps forward. Actually, I was talking to my wife, and I said, here's what my thoughts are, my plan. And I said, I've run it by some people, and people are really excited about it. And she said, oh, it's great, George. So what are you going to do? And she looks at me, and I start crying. I start crying. And she said, what's wrong? I'm like, why me? I mean, I said, because this is not an initiative. This is real. This is about people's lives. And why, as a man of faith, why did God decide to put me at this job at this moment and say that I want you to use this platform to do your part for my people? And I said, and I told her, I'm like, it's bigger than me. And then when you go back to the finances, and I say, I'm financially positioned that they could fire me and I'd be fine. So they can't if you keep doing this, we're going to take your job. I'm like, take it. They can't do that. And so to me, all the things lined up that allow me to say, I'm not pausing. I'm actually, I'm leaning all the way in to do this. And I know that I'm just a small cog in this, but I'm going to do my part on this. And the board and many of the white alumni, I probably have had one note that was negative, and everything else is, I'm glad you're doing this. And this is when I realized that our messaging was right. See, I didn't, you notice what I said? I don't have a social justice initiative.
Right.
I wasn't going to let them call it a social justice initiative.
Right.
I said, this is an economic justice initiative, and I want you to make money. So they couldn't say that I'm going in and say, send your money in and we're going to donate it to Black folk all over the world. That's not what we're doing. And even those things were enlightening to me, that I was like, yep, I have to lean in. I have to, I have to use everything that they taught me, how they operate, how they work. And now I'm in a position to use that for our community. And you know what? Let the chips fall where they may, but you're gonna have to fight me and take me down. This is where one of those things that you put me on a treadmill and I'm running against the world, and they say, you know what, we're gonna beat you. I'm like, well, I'm about to die because I'm gonna keep running. I'm not stopping.
There's a school of thought that says there's nothing more powerful than a person with nothing to lose. And it's usually cast out there in the negative. But in this case, there's just a tremendous amount of positive that can come to bear.
Yes.
And so I thank you for joining me today. I wish you and the college great luck, George. And, please keep us up to date with the progress. Really love to know, because this is such important work.
Caroline, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for what you do. You're a voice to so many. So we're thrilled to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Have a great night.
All right, you too now.
Stay well.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.